Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation. So as Yanni said, I'm here specifically to talk to you about a standard called PAS 301, and this is about the automotive characteristics of a vehicle. Better? Yeah? Okay. Okay. So, as I said, I'm here to talk to you about PAS 301. So this is specifics about the automotive characteristics of the vehicle. It's good to hear with the earlier presentation, we're not just thinking about a vehicle in terms of its blast and ballistic performance, but also its behaviour in a crash scenario, or as I'll present to you, sort of how it handles, how it stops, etc., etc. So first of all, I'll do a small amount of introduction, and then I'll move into talking about the standard. I'll cover an overview, discuss the purpose and the scope of the standards, look at its origins and relationships with other publications, talk about third-party testing and product conformity. Then we'll look specifically about the tests and the test methods within the standard, discuss the records, results and reporting, a small look forward to the end, and if I get the cadence about right, hopefully we'll have 5 minutes towards the end for questions and answers. So introduction is a little bit about myself, first of all, and then I'll move on to talk about UTAC and UTAC special vehicles. So my name's Chris Game. I'm a husband and a father of two. Hobbies are football coaching. I would like to say motorcycling, but really that, as a father of two young children, amounts to wandering into the garage once in a while, looking at my motorcycle and wishing I'd get a chance to ride it once again. I have a first-class honours in automotive engineering. I'm a chartered engineer, and as I said, I stand before you as the chief engineer for UTAC Special Vehicles. So, UTAC. UTAC formed as a merger between UTAC Ceram and the Millbrook Group in 2020. Our products and offerings are vast, so I've got a short video clip that will hopefully cover and give you some understanding of the UTAC group. Okay, so yeah, UTAC, as I said, the offerings of the organisation are vast. Really could spend the whole presentation talking about that. Just to say that we are a product and service provider to the mobility ecosystem, predominantly automotive. We have proving grounds around the world, two in France, the UK, Finland, and most recently Morocco. We also have laboratories all over the world. And that's everything from EMC test chambers, emissions laboratories, crash test labs, and so on and so forth. We also offer services such as homologation, auditing, the list really does go on. So if you want to know more about UTAC and our offerings, please come see me after, or one of my colleagues that are also here today. So I specifically come from UTAC Special Vehicles. We are an independent company, but part of the wider Millbrook group. We are based at the proving ground in the UK, Millbrook. Short slide on some of our offerings. So vehicle assessment and selections, protected vehicles, through-life support, powertrain changes, helping companies with their prototypes, so on and so forth. Our history dates back to around 1998, when General Motors, who were the original founders of the proving ground, started Vauxhall Special Vehicles. Vauxhall Special Vehicles initially did LPG conversions and then moved into the emergency services market. In around about 2004, another department rose up within what was Millbrook at the time, and that was special projects. Very, very similar sorts of things, but typically lower volumes, more niche, specialist vehicle conversions, specialist programs, etc. There's a small or a number of images there of bits and pieces we've done in the past. I won't dwell and show them. Like I say, I'm here to talk to you about PAS 301. In 2011, Special Projects and Vauxhall Special Vehicles joined forces within the group and started producing our first armoured vehicles. Some 12 years on, we're fast approaching our 1,000th armoured car. Okay, so a little bit about me within that. I've actually worked for Millbrook as man and boy. I was the undergraduate in the year 2000. I started in the test side of the business, so first as a durability engineer, then I moved into whole vehicle measurement and assessment, component test, and then as a senior vehicle dynamicist. I then moved into special projects, and since around about 2008, been doing specialist vehicle conversions, systems integration, chassis development for heavier vehicles, that kind of thing. Okay, so moving specifically into PAS 301. So PAS 301, 2017, Civilian Armoured Vehicles, Automotive Test Methods, to give it its full name. So quick overview of the standard. Okay, so first of all, what is a BSI PAS? So two acronyms, BSI, British Standards Institute, and PAS, Publicly Available Specification. Up until preparing this presentation, I actually thought it was publicly available standard, but it's actually specification. What is a PAS? So a PAS is not a full British standard. That's quite important, but it is a process that enables the rapid development of test methods to fulfill an immediate need of industry. That said, a PAS can be put forward for further development as either a British standard, a full British standard, or it could be the UK input to a European or a global international standard. A little bit more on that towards the end. Okay, so PAS 301 was published in April 2017. It was published under licence of the British Standards Institute and was sponsored by what was, at the time, the UK Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure, now known as the National Protective Security Authority. The standard was facilitated, its development was facilitated by the BSI. However, the technical author was the principal engineer from the Special Projects Division of the Metropolitan Police in the UK. It was supported by a steering group and a wider review panel, and they're extracted with the members of the group. You'll see there's a good, healthy mix of fleet managers and procurement, as well as civilian armoured vehicle manufacturers and test houses that helped produce the standard. Excuse me. Okay, so purpose and scope. So PAS 301 describes the methods that may be completed on a civilian armoured vehicle to assess its automotive characteristics. That is the automotive characteristics for payload, acceleration, maximum speed, and through gear acceleration, collectively referred to as AST within the standard, handling, braking, and finally, run flat performance. I'll cover each one later on within the presentation. Now, the scope. The standard says that the scope for PAS 301 is specific to civilian armoured vehicles. However, I would say I've seen this standard used more for specialist vehicles generally, so vehicles that might be, for whatever reason, increased beyond their gross vehicle mass, emergency services vehicles, possibly even, I've seen it used to some extent for large military vehicles and so on. One thing that is important to note is that the standard does not replace any statutory requirements, so type approval as was discussed yesterday and so on. Okay, so its origins and its relationships with other publications. So, PAS 301 was developed from a document called VSAG 12, and specifically Part 3 of that document, Civilian Armoured Vehicles Automotive Testing Handbook. So, first of all, I hear you ask, what's the VSAG? So, VSAG, the UK VSAG, is the Vehicle Security Advisory Group. They are tasked with maintaining and monitoring the standards of civilian armoured vehicles for UK government. There is an IVSAG, an international VSAG, and I believe there's even members of that group here today, both past and present. So VSAG 12, the 12 denotes the revision history, essentially, of the document. VSAG 12 was, funnily enough, issued in 2012. I believe VSAG document dates back to around about 03. I've certainly been using it in versions at 2008, 12, 15, 19, and so on. The revision history does bear some relevance, so bear with me. I'll cover that in a moment. So the VSAG document itself is essentially a procurement tool for civilian armoured vehicles. There's Part 1, which is the overarching document. This is providing guidance to people looking to procure vehicles about what good procurement looks like. It covers the blast and ballistic levels. It covers the automotive characteristics that you might require. It also gets you to consider specifications to the vehicle, additions, fire suppression systems, document windows, all the different additions that a civilian armoured vehicle might require. Then Parts 2 and Part 3 call out the test methods specific for blast and ballistic testing in the case of Part 2, and in Part 3, the automotive testing. Now, the reason the revision history bears some relevance, so VSAG 15 repealed and replaced Part 2 of the VSAG standard to introduce a publicly available specification, publicly available being the important part in the strategy, if you like. So PAS 300, which I know has been presented here in the past, and then VSAG 19, which I believe is the most up-to-date version, then repealed and replaced Part 3, and again put in place a publicly accessible specification for the automotive characteristics. So I think that's important. It's the publicly accessible piece. Previous versions of the VSAG were difficult to gain access to. So that covers the origins and its relationships to other publications. I hope that was informative. The standard talks about third-party testing and product conformity. I have to say the wording is a little vague. The standard says that users of this PAS are advised to consider the desirability of third-party testing of product conformity against this PAS. So what that's essentially saying, anyone can carry out this evaluation with relatively minimal amounts of instrumentation and enough space to complete the testing. This could be done by the procurement agency itself. It could be done by the civilian armoured vehicle manufacturer themselves in advance of procurement. What the standard is alluding to is that independent third-party testing by a test house should help give you a professional service, an independent and impartial results and reporting. Okay, so to then look more specifically about the specific tests within the standard. As I said earlier, the first one, we'll start with the apparatus. So the apparatus you need, as I alluded to earlier, everything about the standard tries to be relatively light touch. There's not very much instrumentation you need. You need to be able to measure the vehicle's speed and its deceleration. You need to be able to measure the brake pedal force, and that's only because there's a limit to the pedal force you can apply in the standard. And then you need to be able to measure ambient environmental conditions, track surface temperatures, and ultimately you could perform a lot of the testing with a stopwatch. There are optional equipment that you can add, which can prove very informative. So, for example, adding little bullet video cameras when you're doing run-flat trials can be very informative as to watching the degradation of the tyre or the run-flat system over the course of time as it runs through the test. But these are additions and optional. Needless to say, the other thing you really need is a facility in order to carry out the testing. So, the first part to the standard. Now, bearing in mind that each of these tests can be done in isolation. They don't all have to be done complete. But the first assessment relates to payload. So the vehicle at its gross vehicle mass is loaded with the number of occupants at the specific weight you expect your occupants to be, and then with the payload you require in the boot of the vehicle. The test is relatively simple. You take all these measurements and then you check actual masses are not exceeded, gross vehicle masses are not exceeded, your tyre load ratings and your wheel load ratings are appropriate to the vehicle. We'll look at this as we go through, but there are the standard has a number of subjective measurements, this being one of those. It's either a pass or a fail, but beyond that as well, when you get into things like handling and certain other areas, you get qualitative assessments where the vehicle is scored, given a rank out of 20, 100, whatever it be. So in this instance, these are subjective. These are objective measurements. It's a straightforward pass-fail criteria. Do you exceed the gross vehicle mass? Okay, so the second part, the second test method within the standard is AST, and that's acceleration, speed, and the T is slightly awkward, but through gear acceleration. So these are really straight line performance assessments. So what I would call a good old-fashioned 0 to 60 time, a quarter mile time, the maximum speed of the vehicle, and then through gear acceleration. So this is looking at engine flexibility. This is looking at the consequence of the additional weight you've added and how is that going to perform if you need to make an overtake or drive the vehicle slightly more aggressively. So again, the AST part of the standard is objective. So against each part you have acceptable levels, and a procurement agency may say, I need a 0 to 60 time of X, a quarter mile time of Y, and so on. So it becomes a pass-fail assessment against those criteria. One thing, that's the pass-fail criteria are shown there. Unfortunately, there isn't time to run into all of that individually. But one thing I did want to discuss in terms of the through gear acceleration. So the standard requires that a manual vehicle is tested in one gear and one gear only, and an automatic is tested in drive and allowed to a period of cruising at the speed before completing the test. The reason I want to discuss it, so you'll see here the graph, top left is the speed trace of the vehicle, and in this instance you can see some 50 to 110 kilometre an hour accels. The bottom left graph is important because this is the demand on the throttle, and this is what I see done wrong a number of times. Within the response of the vehicle, taking an automatic as your example, you put your foot to the floor, there might be a kick down in the gearbox, pulling in a lower gear, etc., etc. A lot of people do the analysis and just look at the time taken to get from 50 to 110. What is important and significant is it should be considered from the point you demand that the vehicle starts accelerating, the point that you put your foot on the throttle. And the reason that is significant, you'll see some of the performance bands are roughly 2 seconds apart, and in this particular instance, there's about 3/4 of a second lag between demanding the throttle and the vehicle beginning to accelerate. Okay, so handling. This is an important part of the standard. This is looking at the overall dynamics of the vehicle, and it's assessed against 4 criteria. So one is a track assessment, one is a slalom test, a double lane change, and a J-turn. So if you're looking at the track assessment, the first thing you need is an appropriate facility. Again, the standard is fairly light touch on what an appropriate facility is. It just says you need a series of left and right-hand bends, some inclines, declines, some high-speed sections to get the vehicles to high and moderate speed, and some heavy braking zones. Beyond that, you're short of not using the car park at work, you're pretty free to work out where you assess. Now, we're blessed with a proving ground, so we would typically conduct this testing on our outer handling circuit. The standard does require you to complete a number of timed laps, but there is no pass, fail, or assessment based on the time lapse. It's purely informative, and hopefully what it's able to show you is consistency, consistent lap times, not just a fluke one-off of a very, very good piece of performance. With the track assessment, so this is where you're now into qualitative evaluation. So you have, I believe, 12 parameters that you evaluate the vehicle against, and the driver or test engineer evaluates, giving each criteria a score of 1 to 4, 1 being if it demonstrates poor attributes against that criteria or parameter, 4 being very good. The standard does give you a narrative around each of the parameters and what maybe constitutes good and bad, but it is qualitative because it is ultimately the opinion of a driver, although you'd like to think an experienced driver who knows civilian armoured vehicles. Okay, so the other qualitative assessment within the handling tests relates to the J-turn. But what is a J-turn, I hear you ask? Now, I would say the J-turn in very simplistic form is similar to a handbrake turn, which I think is much more familiar, but essentially done in reverse. So this is what the J-turn course looks like. There is a 15-metre approach to a box. The box is 20 metres in length, and its width is a function of the length of the vehicle. So in this test, you start with the vehicle at line 1, but the vehicle is facing the opposite direction to the course. So then the vehicle is accelerated across that 15 metres very rapidly, wide open throttle, hard acceleration, typically to one side of the box. As the vehicle enters into the box and you've got enough speed up in reverse, almost instantaneously the driver jumps off the throttle, shuts the throttle shut. That pitches the weight towards the back of the vehicle, puts an aggressive sort of 180-degree steering input in, and then stamps on the foot brake. So this is essentially why I say it's similar to a handbrake turn. So you've begun to yaw the vehicle, but then you've locked the rear wheels, and that starts producing a skid, and the vehicle slews around. Ideally, whilst the vehicle is transitioning and slewing around, the driver is, with the wheels locked, going from reverse to first or drive in the case of an automatic, and hopefully seamlessly then driving away in the forwards direction out of the box. As I say, it's a subjective, it's a qualitative assessment. First of all, can the vehicle perform the manoeuvre, and then you're looking at certain bits around. So, for example, ESP, was it prohibitive to the manoeuvre? Now, I appreciate I've probably not explained that very well, and some of you may still have no idea what a J-turn is. So, what I thought I would do is give you guys a short video. This, in being able to select a video we could use, this is actually a colleague we were training at the time. I'd give him a fairly solid 7 out of 10 for his efforts, but I would say it's a rear-wheel drive vehicle, and it's also an automatic, so it's actually quite challenging to perform the manoeuvre in such a vehicle. Does this autoplay? No. Okay. Okay, so as they say, a picture speaks 1,000 words. Hopefully, for those of you who won't follow in, you've got a better understanding of what the J-turn manoeuvre looks like. Okay, so there are then two objective assessments, one being the slalom. This is really nice, quite straightforward. It's a series of 8 cones, 15 metres apart, and the objective of the test is basically to manoeuvre through, meandering through the cones as quickly as possible. The standard requires that you do this at least 3 times, and your result is the average of your 3 fastest times through the course. So slalom, nice, straightforward and simple. The double lane change, I believe, is a well-known test. Its title is pretty descriptive. A lot of people consider it as an ELK test or an obstacle avoidance test. You are at speed taking evasive action to dive from one lane to the other and back again. So this calls upon a very old ISO standard, 3888. The length of the course is fixed. The widths of the lanes are a function of the width of the vehicle. And again, this is an objective assessment, so there are pass-fail criteria, and it's basically down to how quickly you can get through the course. Sticking on the theme that a picture speaks 1,000 words, first of all, a slalom test. And then on the same vehicle, a double lane change.
Right hand lane change, 110 kilometers per hour.
Okay, so moving on to the next section of the standard, this looks at braking. This, compared to VSAG 12, is probably the part of the standard that's changed the most. I'll try and touch on that a little bit as I look through. Again, this is given an overall scoring, so a qualitative assessment. Although the first 3 parameters that you'll see there, cold brake performance, hot brake performance, and what's called recovery performance, these are objective tests that are then scored based on how the vehicle performs. These objective tests are assessed in terms of stopping distance and in terms of the deceleration of the vehicle. The qualitative assessments relate to how the braking system has performed throughout. Some of these are assessed during the test, so signs of smoke and fire. Others are evaluated after the test, so looking at brake pad degradation, crumbling, wear of the pads, so on and so forth. So this part of the standard is scored ultimately. I want to talk just a little bit about the 3 objective parts of the test. So as I said, they are scored on stopping distance and what's called mean fully developed deceleration. Mean fully developed deceleration, this is a typical graph of the deceleration of a vehicle during this test. So as you apply the brake pedal, the decel ramps up, you then see a peak, and then as the vehicle comes to a stop, the deceleration drops right off. Mean fully developed deceleration is using maths to basically pull out or ignore the first 20% of the vehicle's speed and the last 10%. So it takes out the ramp up and the ramp down, and is trying to quote a value. It's the mean of the maximum during the deceleration. So that's MFDD. As a little example of it in action, again here, so you'll see the top trace is the vehicle speed. The test is done relative to the maximum speed of the vehicle, but normally these days that's quite arbitrary, and so the test is done from 100 kilometres an hour. There's a limit on the brake pedal force of about 50 decanewtons, but the driver is essentially performing an emergency stop as quickly as they can. You'll see in this example, just showing MFDD, so this is why the first 20% and the last 10% are extracted out, and you get an almost textbook sort of mean during the middle of the event. Now, I said this is the part of the standard that's changed most from VSAG 12. The requirements better align with European legislation, so UNECE Reg 13H. The older version of the VSAG had a far more aggressive test in it, I would say. So the heating cycle was looking at the consequences of the additional weight of the vehicle. But it was a very, very aggressive heat cycle. So 30 or 50 brake snubs from 50 miles per hour down to 0 with no dwell time between. Whereas the standard now, as I say, aligns better with the legislation. So it's 2 speeds, so it doesn't go from 1 speed down to 0, slightly higher speed, about 120 kilometres an hour down to 60. But there's only 15 cycles in the heating procedure, and there's 45 seconds between each part. So we've kind of gone from a very aggressive braking test procedure within the standard, typically aimed maybe more at high-speed response vehicles, to something that is perhaps more just aligned with legislation. Okay, so the last test method within the standard is the run-flat test method. So this is looking at the performance of a run-flat system that you may or may not have fitted to your civilian armoured vehicle. There are 3 phases to the assessment. The first is a manoeuvre phase, so this is a very, very short distance, driving very, very quickly and aggressively. There's then what's referred to as an escape phase, where the vehicle is driven for 3 kilometres at 60% of its maximum speed. And then finally, what's referred to as the liaison phase, which is a return to base type thing. Much lower speeds, 30% of the vehicle's maximum speed, but for a much greater distance, 100 kilometres if you can get there. Again, this is a qualitative assessment, so at each transition between each of the different phases, the test engineer will get out and evaluate how the tyre is performing if it hasn't got to a point where the vehicle has become undrivable. So the manoeuvre phase is completed on a figure of 8. So there's 2 50-metre straights. The lanes are, I believe, about 6 metres wide with a 15-metre radius in each turn to create the figure of 8. The vehicle is initially positioned at point 1 and is driven aggressively on wide open throttle as quickly as is possible towards line 2 with an emergency stop where the driver is trying to stop at that point 2. That's then repeated in reverse, so the driver reverses back as quickly as is possible, slams on the brakes trying to stop at point 1 again. After that first piece, the driver then drives as progressively as possible, as quickly as possible, without straying from the boundaries of the lanes, and completes 1 kilometre driving around the figure of 8. At the end of that kilometre, the first part is repeated, so the accelerations between point 1 and point 2, both in forward and reverse. So if the tyre is held up by that point, so here's a tyre that's fared particularly well during that phase, driver gets out, checks his tyre, and then moves to the escape and the liaison phases. Those are completed on a straight piece of test track, although 100 kilometres straight is pretty tricky to find. So we at UTAC would do that on our high-speed circuit, which is like a 2 kilometre bank track. It's essentially driving the vehicle in a straight line. Again, these are qualitative assessments, although you will see down at the bottom there how far the vehicle has managed to progress through the test forms one of those pieces of the scoring. And again, so the same run-flat system in this instance, shown there after completing 100 kilometres of the liaison phase. Okay, records, result and reporting. So just a small touch on this. The good news is that the standard gives you a test report or a test log for each of the test methods within the standard. So fundamentally, if you complete the test log, you've captured all the information you need. In terms of a report, now the report says as a minimum you need to complete the test logs and submit those and issue a certificate. I'm always very wary of a certificate. A certificate is a one-pager, and I think someone procuring a civilian armoured vehicle needs to see a full report. As an example, the run-flat test that we just looked at, against those qualitative assessments, the vehicle could score fairly well, but might not have even completed the liaison, the manoeuvre phase, so it scored highly in the run-flat assessment, but only done half a kilometre. again with the braking. On a one-page certificate, it might say a pass, it might say it scored 33 out of 36, but actually it stopped in 200 metres and was terrible. But that one line isn't weighted within the scoring. So I think it's very important that someone evaluating against PAS 301 is looking at a full report. They're looking at all the details within it, and maybe those extra pieces that we talked about at the beginning, video footage, graphs, additional data that's come from the testing. So that's really all I was going to cover on, it's a good time check. That was all I was going to cover in terms of results and reporting. So a quick look forward. So in producing this presentation, I did make contact with the sponsor and the technical author. Both were very, very pleased that this standard was being discussed in this sort of forum, very much encouraging its use. They did confirm it's just been reviewed to see if it was fit for purpose. And in these sort of more austere times, yes, it would be wonderful to go through further revisions, but right now the sponsor considers it fit for purpose, so its next review will be in about 2 years' time. In terms of looking forward, I do think there's opportunity to make improvements to the standard. I believe it's fit for purpose, but as I said, so certificates or qualitative assessments, finding ways to draw out those results and maybe make them clearer for those that are procuring a vehicle. Okay, so I'll make that bang on. 5 minutes left for Q&A at the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Cheers, guys.
May I have your permission to ask the first question?
Oh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Going into getting myself into the shoes of an end user, a procurement department from one of the NGOs, diplomat. At the end of the day, no matter how proper, comprehensive the standard is, you need some certifying agency that you can trust on as a customer that will come and say, I'm the signing authority that it was being tested properly according to the protocols and everything. And me as a, let's say, a procurement officer in an NGO, I can compare an apple to apple between two suppliers or something like that. Is there any thought, I mean, who are the certifying agencies, the testing houses, things like that, that take these test methods and do that?
So I sort of touched on it on one slide, that the standard, it doesn't force you to use well, there are no certified test houses. There are just established test houses that can carry out this testing for you. Now, the standard, as I said, does allow you to self-evaluate. I know there are police departments within the UK. They'll carry out their own evaluations against the standard. That way, they're forming their own opinions. You also see civilian armoured vehicle manufacturers. They want to tell the world how good their product is, so they might have completed that evaluation themselves. But what the standard is saying is to someone evaluating these results, do consider independent and impartial evaluation. So there's not certified test houses as such, not like, say, PAS 300, where you need sort of UTAC accreditation to carry out the testing. But the standard does, as you've said there, it alludes to the fact that having your vehicle independently and impartially assessed, qualitative assessments, yeah, my vehicle's great, of course, you're going to say something like that. So, yeah, that independent piece, I think, does add value to the report.
Oh, definitely.
Thank you. Hi, Chris. Do you think that the end users should be encouraged to use PAS as well? For example, if you buy an armoured vehicle from a company who's had their vehicle PAS tested, you then take ownership of that vehicle and you decide to change a tyre, that can have a dramatic effect on that vehicle. And really that tyre change you should look at through a system like PAS.
Yeah, I agree absolutely. And if you look at what OEMs are doing these days, a vehicle is type approved with a specific tyre from the manufacturer or tyres endorsed by the manufacturer. So, yeah, I would absolutely agree. If change of tyre, at the very minimum, you need to make sure its speed and load rating is right. But, yeah, your tyre is your only contact with the road. Something as fundamental as a change in tyre or suspension, braking systems. Yeah, if you should then go and reevaluate to make sure you haven't done anything detrimental to your vehicle. Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah. So not all run flat systems are equal. With the tyre, yes, sorry. Yeah, no. So a good test report would capture the build configuration of the vehicle as it was evaluated. Yeah, because you might change the layout of the interior of your vehicle, and then you're affecting the centre of gravity and inertia and things like that. So a good test report would very definitively capture what was tested, not just how.
Hey Chris, Dorian here. The PAS 301 is quite road focused. Obviously, police have been involved. It's J turns and the like, and most people here in the room are building or procuring, armoured vehicles for off-road use. If we didn't have the austere times we're in and we reviewed it, do you think there's a place there for maximum side slope, climb angles, those sort of things that are more off-road focused? That high centre of gravity vehicles might want to get, a user might want to know more about where can I take this thing before it rolls, as opposed to a J turn on maximum acceleration?
So, very good question. And the truth is, off-road evaluation was initially going to be in scope with the standard, but frankly, we ran out of time in developing it. So we first met Q1 of 2016, and the target was to develop the standard within a year. So originally, off-road evaluations, both qualitative, how does this vehicle perform while driving off-road, but some sort of objective measurements as well to give end users idea of the mobility characteristics of the vehicle. Yeah, they were all going to be considered, and I would love to see something like that in a future iteration of the standard, or indeed if this standard was picked up internationally, a European standard or an ISO or something like that. I think that would really add value. So yeah, you have the qualitative assessment, how the driver perceives it's done, but also some objective measurements. So approach and departure angles, ground clearance, fording depths, all those sorts of things that might be useful to a procurement agency to understand.
Cheers.
Any further questions?
Good morning, everyone. Salim from UNDP Yemen. I'm asking about the speed, if there a limited speed that the drivers shouldn't drive more than this speed to keep the vehicle in the safe condition during the driving.
So the short answer is no, there is no limit. A lot of civilian armoured vehicles will put a speed limit on their vehicle purely because a lot of high load capacity tyres tend to have a lower speed rating. But a good, well-armoured vehicle, yes, physics is involved. You're adding hundreds of kilos of additional weight, but a well-designed and produced armoured vehicle should still allow you to drive at speed, in my opinion, relative to the conditions that you're driving in. So good practice, if it's chucking it down with rain and visibility is very low, then you reduce your speed. But in a good, clear, relatively benign environment, no. A manufacturer will state their own maximum speed of the vehicle.
Thank you.
Okay.
Last, no? Okay. Chris, thank you very much. It was great.
Thank you.